I don't really subscribe to the philosophy of you can dial up or dial down your metabolism, right? Like, I think a lot of women think like, oh, when I'm pregnant, I have a faster metabolism. It's actually not really true. And your metabolism is fairly regular until you're like 65.
Okay.
So I think like there's sort of this myth of like, oh, I'm going to rev up my metabolism by having breakfast and stuff like that. That's not really how it works. But what we talk a lot about at Nutrisense is metabolic flexibility. And that's really interesting. And women can kind of dial in and out of metabolic flexibility. They can be flexible in terms of what their metabolism uses as a fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that a lot of women are like, oh, I was in ketosis, or I followed a keto biotic diet, or whatever it is. But generally, it's really hard to sustain for the long term. Like I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of data and talked to hundreds of people, and very few of them have been able to maintain a ketosis type diet for, years and years on end, right?
Wow.
And so what we are aiming to do, and you guys are aiming to do as well, is like to make lifestyle changes, right? Is to make women empowered to make these behavior changes so that it's for their lifestyle. It's not for the next like month or 6 months or whatever it is. And so when we talk to women about metabolic flexibility, that to me is a really sustainable way of flexing in and out of the different fuels that your body is using, kind of depending on, depending on what's going on. And so you can either be using glucose for fuel in the body or ketones for fuel in the body. And it can be really uncomfortable to get into ketosis, to be totally honest. I think people have talked about like the keto flu, where you kind of feel kind of yucky because you're on a very low intake of carbohydrate. But once your body kind of adapts to flexing in and out of it, it can feel better. It can feel easier. And so some women will then kind of go through phases where they will lean more into using carbohydrates and lean more into using ketones. And so I think everyone is different, and some women, it's really, I'm not like, proselytizing about it, but like some women do enjoy that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are the benefits of doing that though? Is it just being more in sync with your body? Is it just kind of like, riding a wave and, you're just riding that wave with your body? What's the benefit of kind of?
It's really about burning two different types of fuel. And so if you're using carbohydrate and glucose, that's kind of that readily available form of energy that maybe you're taking in from your diet, from your carbohydrates. Ketones are fat burn, like that. It's coming from burning fat. And so some women are like, oh, okay, if I get into ketosis, then I'll burn away all my fat. And it's like, well, some of it. Yeah. What I think is the most interesting for women when it comes to metabolic flexibility is really what the brain uses. The brain is wired to use glucose, and the brain needs estrogen to bring the glucose up there. And so if you have an irregular period, or if you are going through like a perimenopause phase in your life, you have very erratic levels of estrogen. And so when you have low estrogen, you might not be able to get the glucose into your brain, hence the brain fog that a lot of women feel. And so it can be helpful for them, if they are feeling that way, to lean more into like a ketotic, on that end of the spectrum, in order to use, because ketones can cross into the brain to be used. So it's really interesting. Again, everyone's a little bit different, but it's really interesting.
But it's a really powerful aspect. It's a really powerful idea, and it's really neat just because you're tuning more into your body, and you're just like, oh, wait, maybe the fuel it needs is this instead of this. And I think that's right. So awesome.